talking about inclusive leadership for an increasingly diverse education organization. And we have Dr. Wayne Lewis, who is our featured facilitator for today. And I'd like to just tell you a little bit about Wayne, who is not only a colleague but a friend of mine. Wayne is an associate professor in the Department of Educational Leadership Studies in the College of Education. He's also the doctoral programs chair, and he is a native Louisianian. One of those fun factoids about Wayne is that he's a jazz saxophonist, wonderful saxophonist. And so without further ado, I'd like to just present a friend and colleague, Wayne Lewis. I'm sure you'll find a lot of invaluable information.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good. I'm glad to hear your response. I have no intention on lecturing you for the next hour or so. I'm going to need you to talk back at me. I'm really excited about being here. Been looking forward to this for some time. I was really appreciative of the invitation from Bill and from Sandra. Before I get started with this presentation session titled Inclusive Leadership for Increasingly Diverse Education Organizations, I want to actually begin with a little bit about myself. I emphasize to students engaging in research, Tricia will attest, that it is important for qualitative researchers in particular to deal with their selves and who they are and their positionality. And so I begin with telling you a little bit more about me so that you know who it is that's speaking to you, and you can keep my perspective in mind as that goes forward, okay? So, as Sandra said, I'm an associate professor, new first-year associate professor in the Department of Education Leadership Studies in the College of Education. I started my academic career here at the University of Kentucky in 2009. So this was my first full-time academic appointment. I came to Kentucky, came to the University of Kentucky from North Carolina, where I completed my doctoral studies at North Carolina State University in Educational Leadership and Policy Studies. And then also I taught while in North Carolina at the middle school and high school level. I was a special education teacher. North Carolina is not my home though. New Orleans is my home. I'm a native New Orleanian, as Sandra said, a proud native New Orleanian. And I was in New Orleans from birth through college, left after college, largely because there's so much going on in New Orleans, I thought I needed to keep myself out of trouble. So I moved to Akron, Ohio, and I was successful. If I stayed in New Orleans, I don't believe I would be here today. So I moved to Akron, met my wife, brought her back down to New Orleans, where we both began careers as public school teachers. And we were there until 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit. We had been married only not even 2 years, and we had recently bought a home. And Katrina forced us to relocate. Actually, Katrina didn't force us to relocate. We evacuated the day before Katrina. After Katrina, we came back within about a week or two, and we relocated because we weren't able to find a place to live. So everybody hears after Katrina about the FEMA trailers and stuff. Well, we went back before the FEMA trailers were there. We couldn't find a place to live, and we both, as public school teachers, got phone calls from the same school district on the same day. Wake County Public Schools in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we relocated to Raleigh. We put everything we owned in a car, which we could do at that point. Moved to Raleigh, and it was one of the best things that's ever happened to us. Truly, it was a blessing for us. I came here in 2009, not because I saw the position announcement for the job in the Department of Education Leadership Studies. True story, I actually saw it in the Chronicle of Higher Education. I was finishing my doctoral degree, and I saw assistant professor, University of Kentucky, Lexington, Kentucky, and I remember looking at the job announcement and saying, nah, I'm not going to Kentucky. Didn't think twice about it. I actually applied at the University of Louisville, I said, I'll go to Louisville, but I don't know about Lexington. I've never been to Lexington. So it was a couple weeks later, and I got a phone call from a friend who was a friend of a friend who was here, who said, hey, I've got a friend at UK. I think they're looking for somebody like you. I think you need to apply for that position. Within a day, I was talking to somebody in the department. Within 2 days, I had met him at a conference in Orlando, and within 2 weeks, I was on campus here interviewing. And early December 2008, I accepted the position and started here in 2009. And I love it here. I love Kentucky. I love the University of Kentucky. And so that is really important. I want you to keep in mind with what I have to say to you today that I love the University of Kentucky. Right? I love the campus. I love the people. In particular, I love my students. I love my colleagues. I've got a colleague in the back who is much more than a colleague, who is one of my best friends, who I would call on to help me come and move wood, shovel snow, if he'd answer the call. Just putting that out there. But I love this place. But the thing we should keep in mind is that things and places that we come to love and we come to know extremely well, it doesn't mean that we're unable to see areas for growth. So I believe that my wife loves me as much as anybody, hopefully more than anybody. But if you were to ask my wife, tell me about some of the ways that Wayne needs to get better, you would have to stop her from listing all the ways. I'm sure, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. If you ask my best friend, tell me the ways where Wayne is a problem, he would keep going and going. It doesn't mean that they don't love me. It means that because they know me, because they see me for who I am, the good, the bad, the faults, that they can speak to those areas of growth. And so I speak to you today as somebody who loves the University of Kentucky, but can also see tremendous areas for growth in the area of diversity and inclusivity. Because while I love being here, while I love the people here, while I love my students, I'm reminded on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis that this is not the community, the inclusive community that we have the opportunity to become. That we can become, that we should become, and that I believe we all must play a role in helping to become. So that's me, okay? One other thing I should add, in terms of my positionality, is there is a new woman in my life. As of December 26, 2014, I became a father for the first time. And that is my little Whitley in her 10-month picture, taken just this last weekend at Boyd's Orchard. And the reason I show you that picture, the reason I bring up Whitley is not just because she's really cute, but she is really cute, right? You have to admit, she's cute. Absolutely the best thing I've ever done is that little girl. But I bring her up because she is a driving motivation for the work that I do. I always work hard in terms of wanting to improve the educational experiences for children and for young people in K-12 education and in higher education. But the truth is, I work that much harder now because I want this to be a place where she's comfortable coming when the time comes. And I want this place to be a much more inclusive place for her. I want her to come here, one, because she wants to be here. And two, when she gets here, I want her to love it as much or more than I do. And so I work really hard at the University of Kentucky to help make the university that kind of place. And then broader than the University of Kentucky, I work really hard in the area of inclusion and diversity because I want the world to be a better place for her. I want us to learn how to live together, to play together, to love together, right? To get along, to appreciate each other in a much better way than we have today. I want that to continue to evolve. So that's me. Before I get started, does anybody have any questions about me or where I'm coming from or why I'm here? Because we're going to get down to business next. Anything? All right. Let's go. Let me say as well, I have to give a little bit of a disclaimer as we prepare to get down to business. I have neither the need nor the desire to engage in surface level conversation about diversity and inclusion. And I need to put that out there as a disclaimer, because much of the conversation that I have the opportunity to be a part of, and I'm not just talking about at the University of Kentucky, I'm talking about in education in general. Much of that conversation is very surface level conversation. That's not why I'm here. I'd rather be grading papers or giving feedback on a dissertation or preparing for class or watching ESPN, watching old reruns of football games. I have no desire to do that. And so my purpose for being here today and my challenge to you for showing up here today is that you will go with me as I challenge you to dig beyond the surface. For us to go much further than the surface in terms of a conversation on diversity and inclusion. Right? That's where I'm coming from, and that's where I'm expecting and where I'm hoping that you will go with me. Diversity conversations are not uncommon on our campus. From the time that I've been at the University of Kentucky, I've been a part of lots of diversity conversations. I've been aware and been a part of diversity initiatives. Some of those, to be quite honest, have been successful. To be quite honest, I think the University of Kentucky has made some strides in the area of diversity. I will say that most of the conversations we have about diversity, though, center on students. And that's pretty important, right? We serve students. There are a lot of students at the University of Kentucky, about 30,000, maybe over 30,000 of them now. And so that attention it makes sense. In terms of the progress that we've made, I hear every year that we bring in more and more diverse classes, that the student population, the student body at the University of Kentucky becomes more and more diverse. And those are really good things. Those are things that we should celebrate. Take nothing away from that. Nothing that I'll say today is to take away from that work. That's important work that must continue. But in addition to serving 30,000 plus students at the University of Kentucky, the university employs a lot of people. Right? Probably just about everybody in this room. Raise your hand if you get a paycheck from the University of Kentucky. The university employs 12,000 plus staff members, employs 2,000 plus faculty members. That's a lot of people. And so as much as we need to pay attention to diversity and inclusion with respect to students, we need to give ample attention to diversity and inclusion with respect to faculty and staff. That's where I want to focus our conversation today. As we continue to do the work with students to make this a more and more diverse place, we've made strides, but we have room to grow. The same is true with faculty and staff. We've made strides, but we have even more room to grow. The faculty and staff at the University of Kentucky is not nearly as reflective of the diversity that we have in our student body. And that's important. Now I want you guys to talk to me. Why would it be important? Or I'm not going to steer you in any direction. If you don't think it's that important, I want to hear from you too. But why do you think, why do you think it might be important that we should strive to have at least the diversity in our faculty and staff that we have within our student body? Yes, ma'am.
So there will be role models for the students.
Role models for the students. The idea that it's important for students to be able to look at the faculty and staff at their university and see themselves in different places. Yes, sir.
Have retention among staff and faculty.
What does that have to do with anything?
Well, if you want to have a community that has enough people that actually understand your experience while you're there. So
Absolutely.
Support for those students.
Support for those students, absolutely.
And for what they're going through.
Yes. And that is not to say, and I want to stop just for a second, that's not to say that if you are not the same race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation as a student, you can't provide support. That's not what she's saying.
No, but who can identify best?
But who can identify with their experience? Yes, ma'am.
They can bring in a variety of experiences into the classroom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes, sir.
I think it's also important to bring divergent thought and to have more dialogue within all ranks, all committees, all parts of the university community. That way the conversation is representative of a much larger volume of what Kentucky's about.
Absolutely. Let me throw into the mix before I come to John, just to clarify what it is that we're talking about when we say diversity, right? Because sometimes we have a tendency to have a really narrow idea of what diversity is. I love the, Orvis, I see on your name tag, you have the statement, what does it say under your name?
Everyone is diverse.
Everyone is diversity. And it couldn't, I mean, you can't say it any better. In terms of diversity, we're talking about difference, and we're all different along any number of different dimensions. A few of those, not an exhaustive list, but when we're talking about diversity, we're talking about differences and characteristics based on stuff like race and ethnicity, national origin, gender, religion, age, sexual orientation, disability status, veteran status, socioeconomic status, educational level, and diversity of thought as well, as my friend just brought out. Those are all important dimensions of diversity. Yes, sir.
Heterogeneous teams outperform homogeneous teams.
Absolutely. Across industries. Both in higher education, in business, and nonprofit sector, absolutely. Absolutely. Let me tell you a quick story with respect to the comment that you made about role models. I'm going to tell you a lot about me, probably more than you ever wanted to know today. So I spent my entire youth in New Orleans. Stayed in New Orleans all the way through college. I attended Loyola University in New Orleans. Had a decent experience at Loyola University. But as you may or may not know, the city of New Orleans is a predominantly black city. And so in my youth and growing up, in my schooling experience, I never went to school, I never attended school with a student who was not African American. Not K through 12. The first time I ever went to school with anybody who was not African American was when I got to college. And it was like culture shock, let me tell you. And some of you, well, you can't be that old. No, I'm not that old. I was born in 1980. I'm not talking about the 1950s. There are still places in the United States of America where people grow up and spend most of their time in very racially, ethnically homogeneous communities. And that was me, right? I give you that background to say this. When I left New Orleans for the first time to attend the University of Akron to work on my master's degree, I remember walking onto the campus. And this is before cell phones, right? Well, there were cell phones. I just did before cell phones for Wayne. So I walked onto the campus. And what caught my eye before anything was groundskeepers, people cutting the grass, who were white. And I couldn't wait to get back home so I could make my long-distance phone call to my best friend Keith. And I said, Keith, you're not going to believe this. Man, they got white people cutting grass. Because that was so far beyond anything I could conceive of. Because in my experience, in my school experience, K-12, higher education, white people didn't cut grass. White people didn't mop the floor. White people didn't sweep the floor. That was stuff black people did. I'm African American. Been African American all my life. And although I never articulated that to anybody growing up, by my shock when I got to the University of Akron and saw black people cutting grass, white people cutting grass, it shows that a part of my subconscious had begun to believe that those are jobs for black people. And that doesn't just happen to African American kids. That happens to whoever grows up in situations like that, in communities like that. Even though nobody ever told me, remember, it's a predominantly black city, so I had black mayor, black police chief, black city council, black doctors, black lawyers, black dentists, but I never saw white people cutting grass. And so diversity across the spectrum of things that people do at a university is incredibly important, if for no other reason, and there are lots of other reasons, but if for no other reason, to show to our students that you can be anything, that you don't have to fit into any one particular box. That's whether you're white, whether you're black, whether you're Latino, doesn't matter. Whether you're male, whether you're female. So we have a ways to go still in terms of growing, increasing the diversity of the faculty and staff at the University of Kentucky. And the goal of being reflective of the student body, I think, is a beginning place. It's not an ending place, it's a beginning place. But that's the place where I think we need to be striving for to begin with. But diversity of faculty and staff is not the ending place. Because we can have a faculty and staff at the University of Kentucky or at any other higher education institution that mirrors the demographic profile of the student body. We can be relatively diverse without being inclusive. What do you think? Tell me, am I crazy? Yes? No? How can that happen? How can we potentially have a situation where we've done all the things that we're supposed to do with respect to diversity, but our university, the university that we love, is not inclusive? Well, it's because achieving metrics in terms of diversity is about percentages. It's about numbers. It's about saying we have X number of people here, we have X number of people there, we have this percentage here, that percentage there. And that is important. I never want to diminish the importance of that conversation, the importance of those goals. We can't stop doing that stuff. But that does not create an inclusive community. It's a necessary but not sufficient condition for inclusivity. So then what does an inclusive community look like? What does it mean to be an inclusive community? If I'm telling you that the University of Kentucky can have all those boxes checked and have all the right percentages and hit all the metrics, what does it mean to be inclusive? How do you know when you get there? Yes, ma'am?
When the differences are not just noted but valued.
You got to tell us more about that. What do you mean by that? I think you're opening a bag of worms.
Well, it means that just because someone's opinion is different doesn't make it valuable in and of itself, but valuing that they have a different perspective and seeing how that difference adds to the total equation.
That's huge. That's huge. Did everybody hear what she said? That's huge. I saw another hand here and then one back there. Yes, sir.
When decision-making is inclusive of that diversity, so whether it's having that diversity represented at the table when decisions are being made, but even beyond that, everyone is making decisions with thought of the folks that it affects, including the aspects of diversity among the student and faculty staff population.
That's powerful. That's a high standard. Absolutely. I saw a hand in the back. Yes, ma'am.
Kind of ties off both of theirs, but when everyone, I put it in context with the students that I work with, when they realize they don't have as many differences with these cultural groups or diverse groups than they thought. They have more in common.
I agree. I agree. Let me throw out a couple concepts that help us to think about and talk about the very same things that you're talking about. What does it mean to say that we expect assimilation in a place? What would it mean to say that we expect that people would come into a place, but then that they would, with their differences, but then the expectation is that they assimilate? What is assimilation? What is it? Conformity. Conformity. Assimilation is dangerous. The expectation that students or adults, that faculty and staff would come to this place with their differences, but then that we would have the expectation that they assimilate, that is dangerous. And as a person who's different, I resent it. Yes, ma'am.
I equate that to the melting pot mentality. Like you hear a lot of people talk about, we want a melting pot. And I like the salad bowl perspective. A salad is much better when you have a little bit of carrots and celery and tomatoes and, and all of it brings about the richness of a salad. And I think that's what true diversity and inclusivity is, more of the salad bowl rather than a melting pot, if you will.
That's my perspective as well. That's my perspective as well. See, it's one thing to say to students, to say to faculty and staff when we come here, oh, you're black, we want you here. Oh, you're Hispanic, we want you here. Oh, you're gay, we want you here. But then to say that once you're here, though, once you're here, black folks, just act like the white folks and you'll be all right. Or to say to the gay folks, well, just act like you're straight and you'll be okay. Or to say folks who for English is not their first or their only language, will just speak English on campus. Even if we don't say those words all of the time, our actions can say those things. We can say, yeah, we value your diversity, you're black, you're beautiful, you're gay, you're beautiful, you're Hispanic, you're beautiful. Just don't bring that black stuff here, though. Just assimilate while you're here. Be normal. Be normal. Be yourself. Be yourself. Be yourself? Well, it depends on who yourself is. If my expectation is assimilation, I got to know who yourself is. Tell me about yourself, and then I'll tell you if you can be it.
Myself?
Just rhetoric. We'll talk later, though. So this brings to mind a conversation as a doctoral student that I had to have with one of my faculty members, and a conversation which I have had now with quite a few of my own doctoral students. And Tricia, I'm not sure if you and I have had this conversation yet, so you get to have it here with everybody else. And that conversation is this: one of the most important decisions for people of color, for women, for people who are not heterosexual to make as doctoral students preparing to enter the academy is what they will write their dissertation on. And I didn't really think about it a whole lot until the faculty member kind of tugged me by the shirt and said, hey, let's talk about this for a minute. I know you want to go into the academy, and I know you're going to be looking for jobs, you'll be out interviewing. You need to be mindful, she said to me, and I say now to others, you need to be mindful of how people will make judgments about you based on what you write your dissertation on. And this isn't a new phenomenon. Since from the time I've been in elementary school, I've been in love with the life and history and the work of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This is a struggle that he dealt with. So as a doctoral student at Boston University, Dr. King struggled with what he would write his dissertation on, and he made the decision to not focus on issues of race or the civil rights movement. He intentionally made that decision. In a similar way that I intentionally made the decision, I'm being honest with you, I intentionally made the decision to not write a dissertation that on the front end dealt with race. As passionate as I am about race, as passionate as I am about diversity, because my faculty member told me, she didn't say don't do it. She said, but you need to be conscious of the fact that if you do it, people will make judgments about you. When you go onto the faculty job market, people might look at what your dissertation is about. They might look at what you've written and say, or make the judgment of whether or not I'm safe. And so I made the decision as a doctoral student that I would write a dissertation on something that would be relatively safe. So that when I went to interview, if you read my dissertation, if you looked at the abstract, anything, you say, well, he's not one of those wild ones. He's not a radical. Truth be told, I think I'm positive my experience on the job market would have been completely different if I'd written a different dissertation. And so I have that same conversation with my own doctoral students, not because I don't want them to write on issues of race and gender and difference, because I actually do. I want more scholars in the field that are doing that type of work. But if you make the decision to do that as a young faculty member, you have to know that higher education isn't as inclusive as we say we are, and that somebody might read your vita and read your dissertation and say, well, she's not quite the right fit for here. Her views are a little bit radical for here. They're a little bit outside of the box. We're talking about higher education. But it's true. It's absolutely true. Before we move on, why? Here's my question for you. Why is it important that we work to make the University of Kentucky a more inclusive place for all people? There's lots of good reasons, but what are some of them?
People do their best work when they're comfortable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We want to create the environment where regardless of how you identify yourself, regardless of your multiple identities, you feel like this is a place I can come and do my job without having to worry about all that other stuff because I can be more productive. That's absolutely one. It is in the best interest of the university, regardless of how you feel about this topic, morally or ethically, it is in the best economic interest of the university to have the university as an inclusive place where regardless of how you come here, you can do your job and do it well. What else? Yes, ma'am.
I think our society is going to keep becoming more diverse, so we need to be prepared and have the right environment to foster growth.
To foster growth in what way?
Well, just being able to constantly be on the cutting edge to prepare our students to go out and be productive citizens.
Absolutely. And so in my title, you notice I said leadership, inclusive leadership for increasingly diverse education organizations. Much of what I'll talk with you about today would apply to organizations, any type of organization. But the difference with us being educational organizations is the expectation, right? It is our job that we begin to model this for our students. We're teaching, whether we're in the classroom or not, we are teaching students, and we need to be able to model inclusivity for them. Absolutely. Any other reasons?
I think business and industry expects our students to be able to work with a diverse population. And so when our students aren't able to do that, then they're not recognized as students that these companies want to hire.
Absolutely. And I'll use myself as an example, Sandra. As I told you, I went to school K through 12 without ever attending school with anybody who was not African American. I needed to come to the higher education and have experiences with people who were different than me, so that I could learn how to work with them, so that I could learn about difference, so that I could get rid of any preconceived notions that I had, stereotypes that were in my head, get to know people for people, get to know more about myself because I'm working with people who are different than me. Higher education, I mean, and so I'll forever tout the importance of higher education doing that because it did it for me. I'll give you one last one. And that is similar to what John threw out for us at the very beginning. If we are intent on becoming the university that we say we want to become, if we are intent on rising to the level of our aspirational peers and institutions that we benchmark against ourselves, the only way we are going to do it is if we can go after the absolute best people in the world. Not just in the country, the absolute best people in the world. And guess what? The absolute best people in the world are not all white, male, heterosexual Christians. Under 40. Married. They're not. And so if we are intent on going to get the best people, we have to first make it inclusive enough to pass the smell test. In other words, when they come to campus and they walk around, do they think, well, I'll take a chance and I'll come here. But then after they get here, it needs to be inclusive enough that they're comfortable enough that they're willing to stay. It's imperative, and this is beyond the moral argument. This is beyond ethics. If you think about this as an institution from no other perspective than a self-interested position, I just want the best for my institution. And truth be told, I don't even care about black people. That's cool. It is in your interest to make this an inclusive space. Now, hopefully that's not anybody. But even if it is, it's in our interest to make this place inclusive. Inclusivity is not tolerance. It's not tolerance. What's tolerance? Somebody tell me. Not an academic definition, just a layman's definition. Yes, ma'am.
To me, it's like, I hate you, but I'm not going to hurt you. Just tolerate you.
Well, if you may or may not hate.
I don't like you.
Yeah, I could not like you and tolerate you. Absolutely. I could hate you and tolerate you. It means I recognize that you're different. I respect that. Just kind of keep your difference over there. I'm not going to bother you.
Putting up with it.
John?
Putting up with it.
Putting up with it. That's a great layman's definition of what tolerance is. Tolerance is way down here on the level in terms of inclusivity. That's baseline. That's like right after I'm not going to cuss you out in your face. I'll tolerate you. I'll deal with you being here. An inclusive community is not a tolerant community. It's a community where I not only recognize our differences, but I embrace our differences. I celebrate our differences. I appreciate you for who you are and what you bring to this place. I don't pretend that you're just like me, because you don't have to be just like me for me to be happy about you being here. That's an inclusive community. That's what I'm talking about. Communities and higher education institutions don't just become inclusive. It doesn't just happen. And that's the case whether we're talking about inclusivity or some other metric. Organizations don't just stumble on success, not long term. Businesses don't just stumble on productivity. They don't stumble on profit over a long period of time. It just doesn't happen that way. Organizations that are successful in any sense of the word, or organizations that typically have good leadership. And so if we are going to become an inclusive institution, a more inclusive institution, I'll say more because we have started on that path. But if we're going to become a more inclusive institution, the only way that's going to happen is with leadership. Now, there is many definitions of leadership as there are people out there. People define leadership all kinds of different ways. And so, to be clear on what I'm talking about, I picked out one that I like to use in some of my classes. This is from Peter Nordhaus, who has a really great textbook now in his 7th edition. Peter's a professor emeritus of communication at Western Michigan University. And he defines leadership, I think, pretty simply and brilliantly as a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. Let's digest that just for a second. And as you're digesting it, let's do a little work at deconstructing. What do you see in that definition? We're not even talking about inclusive leadership yet, just the definition of leadership. What do you see in that definition? What stands out for you?
It's a process.
It's a process. It's a process. So leadership is not just an act, not according to Nordhaus and not according to Wayne either. You don't become a leader because you did one thing. You don't become a leader because you did several disconnected things. But leadership is about being a process. One other thing I'll note, because I don't want you to miss this, the article a instead of the use of the article the. Which means, according to Nordhaus, and I agree, that leadership doesn't mean one single process or one type of process. We can lead in different ways, and in fact, we do lead in different ways. There are different characteristics to our leadership because we're different people. We have different styles. You put us in different contexts. If you're an effective leader, you put you in a different context, your leadership ought to look a little bit different. Depending on the goal, your leadership ought to look a little bit different. So leadership is a process, not just an act or a series of disconnected acts, but it's a process. What else stands out for you from the definition? Yes, sir.
Influences?
Influences. What is it?
Well, it doesn't say forced, ordered, made. You know, it's influences. It's not like an authoritative regime on you.
But it could be.
Yes.
It could be, but not necessarily. It's actually pretty open on the area of influences. Influences just means I get them to do it. Whether that means by my charisma, or because I inspire them, or because of incentives that I put in place, or because of punishments or consequences that I put in place. But a leader, which is really important here, engages in a process which influences people. In order to lead, you have to be able to influence people. If you're not influencing anybody, you're not leading. Had a professor say once, a guy that calls himself leading with nobody following him, he's just taking a walk. It's not leadership. A leader influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. What about that common goal piece? What do you think that's all about?
If the individuals don't have the same common goal, there's no point, that guy's not going to be their leader.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because this group is comprised of individuals who might have lots of different goals for themselves individually. But organizational leadership is about leading the group toward achieving a common goal. And so the leader ought to, an effective leader, plays a big role in helping to come to consensus on what that goal is and then moving those people toward achieving that goal. Okay? This becomes incredibly important when thinking about inclusive leadership or leadership for inclusivity, because as we said before, inclusive organizations don't just happen. In fact, inclusive organizations are not the norm. Yes, sir.
I just want to point to the fact that it's the individual influencing the group, but the individual has to be part of the group. Meaning, in order to have influence, you must be included in that group.
Say more.
Well, when we're talking about creating an inclusive environment, I think it's important to recognize that there's going to be leaders. It doesn't say the leader is the commander-in-chief. The leader could be any one of those individuals creating influence.
That's right. That's right.
But in order to do that, you must be included in that group.
Yeah.
To have that influence.
Yeah. The other thing I'll point out that's really important with what you said is that you said a lot of really, really important things. Let me remember which one I wanted to pull out. Being a part of the group, and it'll come back to me.
You said that the leader could be any person in the group.
The leader can be any person in the group. You knew exactly what I was remembering. It is that leadership doesn't always come with a title. Doesn't always come with a title, and having a title doesn't always make you a leader.
It's like a jury, you know?
Yeah, where leadership emerges.
Yeah,
Yeah.
somebody in that jury might lead the jury in whatever direction, and it might not be the person who ultimately reads the verdict to the judge or anything. It's just that somebody takes charge of the jury and can point them in whatever direction they want.
Leadership can absolutely emerge in that way. Absolutely. Fantastic. Fantastic. Leadership is so important for inclusivity because inclusivity does not just happen. It doesn't just happen, right? But people say time changes everything. Time doesn't change anything. Time doesn't change anything. Just time passing is not going to make the University of Kentucky a more inclusive place. It's not going to make the University of Kentucky a more diverse place, a more welcoming place, a place where we don't expect people to leave their differences outside when they come here. No, time doesn't do that thing. But leadership can help a whole lot. Let's remember this definition of leadership. What I want to talk to you with the time that we have remaining, let me keep track of time. With the time that we have remaining, and absolutely want to keep a lot of time for questions and discussion, and I'm hoping that you guys have a lot. Is I want to talk with you about a few characteristics which I believe are absolutely essential for inclusive leadership. For leadership in moving higher education institutions, for leadership that moves organizations generally toward becoming inclusive. And the first one of those characteristics is courageous leadership. If you're going to be a leader in this area, if you're going to be a leader in terms of trying to make this institution or your department or your college or wherever space you have or you're situated in the university more inclusive, then you're going to have to be courageous. Tell me why.
There's going to be a lot of opposition.
Absolutely. Contrary to popular belief, everybody does not want this place to become more inclusive. Why do we act like that? Why do we talk like that? Why do we say stuff like, well, of course everybody wants this place to be more inclusive. Why would we make that assumption? If everybody wanted the place to be more inclusive, it'd be a whole lot easier to do it. But everybody is not on board with making it more inclusive. And you need to know that if you sign up to be a leader who wants to lead in this area, that you're going to say or you're going to do some things that are going to tick people off. And if you're not saying or doing anything that's ticking anybody off, then you're not doing it. That's true of leadership generally. If everybody's supportive and happy with what you're doing as a leader, with what you're saying as a leader, then you're not saying anything. Because everybody's not going to agree with you. With this in particular. One of the things you have to keep in mind is that places, that if we define exclusivity as the opposite of inclusivity, places did not become exclusive just by happenstance. Institutions, organizations didn't become exclusive institutions or places just because that's just the way things just happen to win. No, it's been intentional. It's been intentional efforts that have led us to the place where we have to do the hard work of working to become more inclusive. And so the theory, the idea that we would become inclusive now by just saying, just let it happen, is completely ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. And so if you're going to lead in this area, you better know and you better be ready to make people upset. You're going to find allies, and I suggest that you find allies, but you also need to know that people will be coming for you. Questions, comments, ideas? Yes, ma'am.
I think you also have to have the courage to acknowledge your own demons or things that you don't like about your
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we all have those, right? We all come to the table with our particular biases. Absolutely. It does take courage. Other questions, ideas, comments? Courageous leadership is an absolutely essential piece. The second essential piece, and this is by no way an exclusive list that I'm going to give you. We only have a few minutes, but I would argue that every single one of these is absolutely essential. Not exclusive, but absolutely essential. The second one is visionary leadership. What's visionary leadership? What's it mean to be a visionary leader?
I think it's the ability to survey the entire landscape, take a broad look and visualize everything that's changing and understand where you or your organization is at that moment in time and say, here is where we need to go.
That's absolutely. I couldn't have put it better myself. That's absolutely. It is the ability to be able to see an improved future state of your organization, of your unit, of your college, of your institution. Being able to look out into the future, look beyond who we are and where we are currently, and saying, that's who we're gonna be. That's the organization we're going to become. I believe vision is so important to leadership that and you can take this to the bank, if you don't have vision as a leader, you can't lead. Because where are you going to take people to? Where are you going? If I'm leading, I want you to follow me. Where are we going? I don't know. If I'm going to lead an organization, I have to have a destination, and that destination is what I ought to be able to have a mental picture of, so that I know where we're taking people. In terms of visionary leadership for inclusivity, I ought to be able to see the future of my unit, of my department, of my center, and say, this is the inclusive space that we desire to be, that we intend to become. You ought to be able to describe the way people interact with each other. You ought to be able to describe the way people value differences of opinion, the way people appreciate diverse standpoints. You can even get more specific. You ought to be able to visualize search processes for faculty and for new staff that are inclusive. You ought to be thinking about policies and procedures and practices with respect to students and see a completely different way of doing things than the way you currently do them if you're not currently an inclusive organization. You have to be able to see it. That's after you've mustered up the courage to be able to lead in this way. If you can't see it, you're not going anywhere. Here's an activity I have for you, really quick. You got to do it really fast. Here are the directions, and I call this activity, See Yourself. I want you to see your department, your unit, your office, wherever you are. If you're at the institute, work at the institutional level, see the institution 10 years from now as the inclusive place and space that you desire it to be. I want you to concentrate just for a minute on nothing but that. I want you to see it. Literally, I want you to see it in your mind's eye. And if you have a pen or a pencil, I want you to jot down a few characteristics of that future state of wherever you are, placing particular emphasis on characteristics that are different than the way your organization or your unit operates right now. Take just a few seconds. See it. Now, as you're beginning to see it, as you're naming those characteristics, I want you to shout out some of those characteristics of your unit in a future state. a future more inclusive state? What are some of the characteristics of that place and space? Just shout them out.
Open-mindedness.
Open-mindedness. What does it look like for you? How do you see it?
With acceptance of different cultures within our office space.
Yeah.
Genders and sexuality as well.
What else? What else do you see in that future state of your union?
Collaboration.
Collaboration. Tell us more.
Collaboration versus cooperation. I don't want your cooperation, I want your collaboration.
Yeah. That's huge. That's huge. I just want to point out that Tricia is my doctoral student. Hence her brilliance. She said collaboration, not cooperation. When I want you to cooperate with me, it means I have an agenda, I have a plan, and I want you to come help me do what I intend to do. Collaboration means that I am ceding some power, that I'm ceding some responsibility, that it's not about you just come and help me do what I want to do, but that we're going to figure out what to do together. Because I value your perspective, I value your vision, I value what you have to add to this space. What else? Other characteristics that you see. We got time for one or two more.
Transparency.
Transparency. Tell us more.
I guess I'm thinking about pink elephants, or he's not pink elephants, elephant in the room,
Mm-hmm.
and being willing to have hard conversations and recognizing what's really influencing things, not what we're dancing.
Yeah, that's powerful. That's powerful. One more.
I see every department and unit having something that they're doing that's contributing to inclusion and diversity. Every department across campus to have something that they're doing to contribute to that long-term goal.
That's big. That's big.
Can I just,
Yes, ma'am.
to me, it's a learning. Because I think, I worked in the International Center for quite a while, and that when you have so much inclusion and so much diversity within a small confined area as that, I learned more about other cultures and religions, and just, and not just their prayer, but their everyday life, their thoughts, and how there is so much hatred that is built in that out of fear of that unknown. So,
Yeah.
the opportunity to learn more about each other is.
Yeah, that's a characteristic of the future space I see as well. Where we come to the understanding that we never reach this place of quote unquote complete competence, but that we're continuing to learn, continuing to grow, and to seek opportunities to learn and grow. Absolutely. Courageous leadership, visionary leadership. But it's not enough to be courageous and have a vision of where you want to go. You also have to be strategic. Strategic leadership is absolutely essential if you want to achieve the vision that you've laid out. Because remember, it won't just happen, so you have to plan for it. You have to plan for it. So in some of the work that I do, it is around universities, institutions, strategic planning. Specifically in the area of increasing the diversity of faculty and in retaining faculty diversity, right? And one of the interesting findings from some of that work is that most institutions that engage in meaningful strategic planning set diversity goals. Most institutions set goals. Now, the quality of those goals is a different question. Here's one thing that stands out for me about the goals that institutions set. Institutions tend to set goals that they know are relatively easy to achieve, rather than setting goals that intentionally stretch you. We even call those stretch goals in strategic planning. Institutions are much more hesitant to set stretch goals, goals that they're not sure they're going to be able to reach, that they're going to have to work like hell if they really want to. Institutions don't typically set those, and if they do, they don't set them in the area of inclusion and diversity. Most institutions set goals. A fewer number of institutions will set goals and also articulate strategies for achieving those goals. All set goals, just about all. Smaller number have goals and strategies, specific strategies for achieving those goals. An even smaller subset of those institutions have goals, specific strategies for achieving those goals, and have set measurable targets. So institutions will say, we're going to do this. A few less will say, we're going to do this, and this is how we're going to do it. A very small number of institutions will say, this is what we're going to do. It's bold. It's going to move us forward. This is the specific strategy aligned with helping us to achieve it, and this is how you're going to hold us accountable for making sure that we've done it. That is not the norm. That is not the norm.
Which kind of institution is UK?
I haven't done enough work to say. And the other reason why I won't speak specifically to UK is we're undergoing a strategic planning process right now. And so anything that I would have to say about the institution would be about the old strategic plan. And that wouldn't be meaningful at this point. I'm not dodging the question.
Because I know how hard it is to change even small things at UK. Everybody who works here knows that. So I'm just wondering, on a big picture, I mean, it's even harder. So.
Yeah. Yeah. I can say that in terms of, because the University of Kentucky was a part, its strategic plan was a part of our data set. The strategic plan was the old strategic plan. And I can tell you that it did not make it into that small group of institutions that set really bold, forward goals that had really research-based strategies for moving us forward and great metrics for achievement. I can say that. One last activity I want you to do with me. You have envisioned the future improved state of your unit, of your college, of your institution. Now I want you to take just a minute. Just a minute. I want you to think about a goal, a specific, measurable, ideally, goal that you could set in the area of diversity or inclusion. I want you to align that goal with a strategy that you would put in place for achieving it. And I want you to give us a metric. I want you to tell us how we would be able to measure whether or not you've achieved that goal. Take just a minute, aligned with that vision that you saw, that you still have in your head of your unit, of your college. A goal, an aligned strategy, and a metric. I know this is hard work. Get as far as you can. Just a few more seconds. All right. Who has something they want to share with us? What have you come up with? Doesn't matter if it's incomplete, doesn't matter if it's rough. This is really hard. As a university, it took us a couple years to do this, so I don't expect you to do a whole lot in just a minute. What do you have? Yes, sir.
I have, for the King Center, support the increase in maintenance of diverse faculty. And along with that, I had, provide opportunities for diverse faculty to engage with students outside of the classroom. That's a way of connecting with the campus.
Were you able to get as far as thinking about how we would be able to hold you accountable? How would we know whether or not you met the goal that you've set?
I didn't get to that, but my thought would be, I guess a number, how many programs, or an actual opportunity provided each semester.
So here's the challenge I would give you. That type of metric is probably the most common metric that I saw used across strategic plans. Metrics that got at whether or not we had implemented some type of program, right? And that gets at checking off the box, saying we did it. I would challenge you to think about metrics that get at impact. I would challenge, so if your intent is supporting faculty and staff, right? I would challenge you to think about metrics that get at whether or not you actually achieved that aim. Not just that you did that you carried out the project, that you held the initiative, but did you have the type of impact on faculty and staff that you sought to have? Great idea. Thank you, Khalil. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
So I thought for the specific goal, I thought of acceptance and respect for diversity and inclusion among students. And in terms of the strategy for achieving the goal, I know that the university is working toward this unconscious bias community that I'm really, really excited about. And so that would be the strategy that impacts faculty, staff, and students. And then upon graduation, surveying students to identify some of the ways in which they have changed their attitudes and behaviors. And then maybe a year or 18 months following graduation, follow up with the students as well as employers to find out the ways in which they have impacted change and also see if the employers can identify evidence of that change.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. I'll tell you what, one of the things, there's a few things that make what Sandra's proposing scary to institutions. When you talk about surveying students to see whether or not what you've done actually had an impact on their thinking or the way they conduct themselves or the way they see people who are different than them, when you collect that data, you have to open yourself up to the possibility that maybe it didn't work. And it's a scary thing for institutions to set goals and set metrics where they can collect the data and have absolutely no idea whether they had the impact that they intended to have.
Since you're talking about things that may not work. let me
Yes,
not
sir.
put me out there. I'm in faculty advancement, and we're doing what we can to increase leadership skills of faculty, through various leadership development programs and starting the Women's Executive Leadership Development Program. One goal I would like to have is to be able to look at the roster of chairs and directors, of which we have 103 currently, and to be able to say 5-6 years from now we have 45% women, 20% underrepresented faculty holding those roles. I mean, just is something that is quantifiable. I don't have that data in front of me, but it's preponderance is men, in those leadership roles. And I think it would be a sign of improvement in this institution if we could achieve greater level of inclusion in those unit administrative roles in the next 5 years.
That's really powerful. Because what GT is saying, if you think through all the things that we've talked about, first of all, setting a goal like that is incredibly courageous. It's incredibly courageous to say that. The numbers that you were talking about in terms of percentages of women and underrepresented people, and having that type of composition, that diversity of composition, is pretty forward thinking, right? Now you align.
It's easier to say as the older you get. You understand that?
I hear you. I hear you. Hey, but you know what? I can appreciate as well that it's easier for me to say and do things as a tenured faculty member here than it would be if I wasn't.
Correct.
That's just telling the truth. That's just being honest. There are things I'm willing to say now that I wouldn't have said a year ago. I'm telling you the truth. But I think that's incredibly courageous. I think there's a way you guys are identifying specific strategies aligned with achieving that. And you would know absolutely whether or not you met it or not, because you could count it. You could see. Really powerful. Here's the last element, essential element of leadership. Does anybody know who this is? Anybody know who that is? Nobody knows who it is? Come on, take a guess. Yes, ma'am.
Harriet Tubman.
Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman is absolutely one of my heroes. And I would submit that an essential element, the last essential element to leadership, that has to be there if you're going to lead institutions or units toward becoming more inclusive, is determination. And I'll tell you why I put the picture of Harriet Tubman there for determination. If you know anything about Harriet Tubman, I'll tell you a little bit about her. Fascinating woman, born into slavery, spent much of her life as a slave, escaped slavery, and is credited with leading to freedom through the Underground Railroad some 1,000 slaves. And Harriet Tubman said, I freed 1,000 slaves. I would have freed even more if they'd known they were slaves. I'll give you one more tidbit about her, and this really gets to the reason why I put her there. Not just legend says, it is true that Harriet used to carry a pistol as she was leading people to freedom. Now, you might think, well, that makes sense. She got her hands on a pistol. If somebody was coming after them, right, she'd turn around and shoot them so they could run to freedom. But that was not the reason that Harriet had the pistol. Harriet had the pistol for the slaves that wanted to turn back around. She killed them. Harriet said, you're going to be free today. Either because you're going to come with me or you're going to go see your Lord. That's determination. Now, I am not suggesting, and this is live stream, right? Right? So tenure only goes so far. I am in no way suggesting that you should grab a pistol and go back to your departments and say, we're going to be inclusive if it kills us. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is that leadership in this area requires a particular type of determination. Because there are more than a few people that start off with great intentions, that want to lead in this area, that want to help lead in this area, that want to help us to become a more inclusive place, but they run into roadblocks and barriers and difficult people and ideas and threats, right? And having to think about, I need to keep my job so I can feed my family. Real things. I'm not talking about, trivial things. These are real considerations. People will run into those things and they will stop short. But I would submit to you that determined leadership is absolutely the only way that we're going to make meaningful strides toward becoming an inclusive community. Because the stack the deck is stacked against us. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take courage.
When
Yes.
I thought this was genius that she said I could have freed more slaves if they knew they were slaves. And then to your previous, this one, but the one before the last one, the leadership is the attitude. We cannot progress if we do not admit attitude is there. So we know we have this problem and we will do something about it.
Absolutely.
So I felt like that was genius. If we knew we have this problem, we could do something about it.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. And the last question I have for you is, we have a couple minutes, hopefully just to take some questions, is why not you? Why not you? Why not you to be the leader in the space where you're assigned, where you're situated, to begin this type of movement right where you sit? And it doesn't matter what your job is, doesn't matter what your position, it doesn't matter if you just got to the University of Kentucky yesterday or you've been here for 30 years. Why not you? I don't think there's any good reason. Questions, comments, discussion, anything you have. I may not have the answer, but I'm absolutely willing to talk about it.
For me, it's like, I don't want to be that difficult person all the time, that, oh, she said it again, and we know what she meant, and, you know, when I say something, and the folks like, you know, rolls up eyes, like, oh, you old. So, like, in other words, like, I don't want to be that person all the time.
Right.
So,
Right.
I think that's fun.
Yeah, and you know, that is symptomatic of the place where we are, right? A place that has made strides, but that we do feel that degree of tension, that angst, that unease sometimes about pointing out things in our space that are not inclusive, about pointing out practices and policies that are not inclusive. And so we have to work really hard. And I always say, first of all, work really hard to create the type of community and culture where students feel protected. And then where faculty and staff feel protected as well, where they're not ostracized or labeled as the difficult person for doing that.
But also, don't you think it's like more the hiring officials have to be that way, and then like me, the staff person whose hands are tied?
I think it's all of us. I think it's all of us, because I mean, we think about our jobs, right? Just in terms of what we do. How many opportunities do we have just based on the people that we talk to on the phone or through email communication, or whose paperwork passes through our desk, whose decisions we have to make? We have to make decisions about their cases and their education. I think we can start right where we are, but we absolutely have to get those people on board as well. Yes, ma'am.
Right, because you can bring all the different types of people here that you want, but if they don't come here and feel like they're valued, then they won't stay.
That's right.
So you can, and then it's worse, because then you have all that attrition, people come, but then they don't stay.
Yeah.
And that's the culture.
And if you're really good, you can go somewhere else.
So you might not in your daily job be able to maybe make your own realm more diverse or more inclusive, but you can, like you said, in every way that you interact with anyone else that is different than you, which is pretty much everyone else, then you can affect that change just every day, every minute of your job.
Yes. The other thing we can do is we can hold our leaders accountable for leading in this fashion. We can hold our leaders accountable, and that doesn't always have to be confrontational. Sometimes it can just be for asking questions. They're like, oh, I'm just wondering, why'd you make that decision? Tell me more about that. Our time is up. Thank you guys so much.
Sandra had to leave to set up for her session, which is in the room here in the Boone Center. But again, I want to thank Wayne for his provocative remarks and for sharing his experiences with us in a very personal way. And so glad to have you in this community.
Thank you.
Thanks again.